And also, essentially across the board, the combination group did as well or better than the other two weight loss groups. And specifically, what's interesting is that looking at the metrics you would expect the aerobic only and resistance only groups to perform well or perform better than the other groups, the combination group did just as well. So if we look at VO2 max changes, for example, the aerobic only and the combination group both did better than the resistance training group. And also, essentially across the board, the combination group did as well or better than the other two weight loss groups. And but there's no difference. There's no statistically significant difference between the combination group and the aerobic group when it comes to VO2 max. The same is true in that the combination group saw significant increases in one repetition maximum that were not statistically significantly different from the resistance training only group, but that were statistically significantly better than the aerobic only group. The aerobic only group essentially just maintained their strength, while both the resistance only and the combination group increased their strength. In addition, I think this is another example of exercise in general, particularly resistance training or resistance plus aerobic training, making a huge impact when it comes to weight loss, and especially in these older individuals, because there's just a major difference between where they were at the start, having potentially poor cardiorespiratory fitness and poor strength and muscle mass metrics, and also being obese with a BMI, I believe, averaging 36 in this population, to after the study where they lost significant amounts of weight, right, 17 to 20 pounds, and increased their aerobic fitness in some of the groups, and increased their strength in some of the groups while mitigating muscle mass losses. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Talking Studies series where I break down interesting individual research papers that I've read. Uh, we should recognize the caveat that it's important not to over extrapolate or overemphasize any one individual study, and that you should take the overarching body of evidence into account when looking at any given topic. With that said, I've been reading a lot about weight loss and muscle mass changes associated with weight loss lately, and I came across this study by Villarreal and colleagues called Aerobic or Resistance Exercise or Both in Dieting Obese Older Adults that I thought had some pretty interesting takeaways. And to start, some background on the paper. These authors in particular were interested in the impacts of weight loss in obese elderly individuals, as the title alludes to, in that these individuals, like pretty much everybody else, have a lot of benefits to gain from losing weight, in particular fat mass. However, they're also particularly vulnerable to issues that come with losing fat free mass, specifically muscle mass, because these individuals tend to be more frail, and broken bone for one of these individuals that puts them on bed rest for a few weeks or something like that can seriously derail their quality of life for the rest of the time that they're alive. So for these individuals in particular, it's important that we try to preserve muscle mass while losing weight. And pretty much the authors wanted to look at whether or not the pros and cons balance out when it comes to attempting weight loss in these individuals, and particularly whether or not implementing exercise protocols on top of weight loss diets will have a positive effect in this regard. Just a little piece from their intro, quote, more than a third of persons 65 years of age or older in the United States are obese. And this group constitutes a population vulnerable to adverse outcomes because obesity exacerbates the age-related decline in physical function and causes frailty. However, appropriate management of obesity in older adults remains controversial given the reported reduction in relative health risks associated with increasing body mass index in this group. Moreover, an important concern is that weight loss could worsen frailty by accelerating the age-related decline in muscle and bone mass and result in sarcopenia and osteopenia, end quote. So they were addressing exactly what that quote kind of alluded to. Like I said, the drawbacks and potential benefits of weight loss and the muscle mass changes that come with that in these obese elderly individuals. And it's important to note that their protocol is kind of based off of a previous study from 2011, also by Villarreal and colleagues, called Weight Loss, Exercise, or Both, and Physical Function in Obese Older Adults. And yeah, that was in 2011, and they had a similar protocol to this one, except they had a control group, a weight loss diet group, and then an exercise group that combined both aerobic and resistance exercise or resistance training. And what they found in that study, they had another group on top of that, which was just an exercise group without a weight loss diet. And what they found in that study was that the individuals in the diet plus exercise group were able to mitigate some of the lean body mass losses and also the decreases in thigh muscle cross-sectional area that were seen in the individuals who were just following the weight loss diet. However, they weren't able to completely eliminate those losses in those muscle mass related metrics. The exercise alone group was able to increase those metrics. So the point of this study is pretty much to test whether or not using just aerobic exercise, or more importantly, just resistance exercise, will make a difference. So in the first study, combining both aerobic and resistance training was not able to completely prevent the muscle mass losses. So the authors are pretty much testing whether or not resistance training alone, in particular, will have a superior impact than combining aerobic and resistance training, as well as whether or not aerobic training alone will have any different impacts on these muscle mass metrics compared to the combination option. In this study, they used subjects or recruited subjects who were elderly, so 65 years or older, and obese, determined or defined by a BMI of 30 or greater. These individuals were also sedentary, defined as not regularly exercising an hour or more per week. And they also had stable body weight and stable medication use leading up to the study. And they also had to have no conditions, musculoskeletal or cardiovascular, any serious issues that would prevent them from following either the diet or the exercise protocol. And they ended up having 141 subjects complete the study. And these individuals were split between four groups. First was a control group, which essentially had or did nothing across the 6-month period of the study, except for attend nutritional classes, which, as I understand it, weren't directed towards weight loss, but rather were probably directed towards just healthy quality of diet. But these sessions weren't directed towards these subjects having any type of weight loss over the 6-month period. The second group was a weight loss diet plus aerobic exercise, and so this group uh, followed a diet that had them in a 500 to 750 caloric deficit per day. And for their exercise protocol, quote, they also participated in aerobic exercise training sessions 3 times weekly. The sessions were approximately 60 minutes long and included 10 minutes of flexibility exercises, followed by 40 minutes of aerobic exercises and 10 minutes of balance exercises. The aerobic exercises consisted of treadmill, walking, stationary cycling, and stair climbing. Participants exercised at approximately 65% of their peak heart rate, which was gradually increased to 70 to 85%, end quote. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's a pretty standard aerobic exercise protocol. The third group was one that followed the same weight loss diet as the aerobic group, but instead of aerobic training, they did resistance exercise training. Quote, the resistance group participated in the same weight management program as the aerobic group, as well as resistance exercise training sessions 3 times weekly. The sessions were approximately 60 minutes long and included 10 minutes of flexibility exercises, followed by 40 minutes of resistance exercises and 10 minutes of balance exercises. The resistance training consisted of 9 upper body and lower body exercises using weightlifting machines. The initial sessions were 2 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions at 65% of the 1 repetition maximum. This was increased progressively to 2 to 3 sets at approximately 85% of the 1 repetition maximum, end quote. So again, as far as I'm concerned, a pretty standard resistance training protocol, especially for the purposes of both increasing strength and muscle mass, which I think is notable because some other studies, like another one that I looked at, I believe, in a previous Talking Studies episode, don't always utilize pretty standard resistance training protocols. They'll do a lot of like circuit training with, I don't know, like stuff like kettlebell swings that aren't exactly ideal for building muscle, although they can improve strength and muscle mass, especially in untrained individuals. Anyways, my point is that this is a pretty well drawn out resistance training program for the sake of preserving or potentially even building muscle mass. And now the fourth and final group was one that had the weight loss diet, as well as the aerobic and the resistance training protocols. Quote, the combination group participated in the same weight management program as the other exercise groups, as well as combined aerobic and resistance exercise training sessions 3 times weekly. The sessions were 75 to 90 minutes long and included 10 minutes of flexibility exercises, followed by 30 to 40 minutes of aerobic exercises, 30 to 40 minutes of resistance exercises, and 10 minutes of balance exercises, end quote. So they had the same weight loss diet, And for the exercise protocol, they didn't just split in half the aerobic and resistance protocols, they actually combined them. So they were doing more overall exercise than either group, either the aerobic or the resistance training groups. And for their tests, the primary outcomes for this study actually weren't weight loss or measures of muscle mass or proxies for muscle mass, like lean body mass per se. They were actually primarily looking at measures of frailty and kind of quality of life for these elderly individuals. And so they assessed uh, they used two frailty tests. The first being a combination of a bunch of different physical performance tasks that are kind of related to daily activities. Quote, frailty was assessed with the physical performance test. The physical performance test includes 7 standardized tasks: walking 15.2 meters or 50 feet, putting on and removing a coat, picking up a penny, standing up from a chair, lifting a book, climbing one flight of stairs, and performing a progressive Romberg test, plus 2 additional tasks, going up and down 4 flights of stairs and making a 360-degree turn, end quote. And they also used a questionnaire which asked a series of questions that were related to quality of life and, as I understand it, their ability to kind of carry out daily activities. In addition to this, they used some more formal or standard measures of physical performance. They did a VO2 max test, which, for anyone who isn't familiar, is a measure of cardiorespiratory fitness that entails using some type of endurance training modality, whether it be a stationary bike or walking on a treadmill, and gradually increasing the speed or resistance on that modality until the individual reaches the point at which they are consuming and utilizing the maximum amount of oxygen that they can. They will wear like a mask that tracks how much CO2 they're giving out and how much oxygen they're taking in, and essentially just looks at the maximum, just like the name implies, VO2 max looks at the maximum amount of oxygen you can use, which is a very valuable or very highly held measure of cardiorespiratory fitness, and is also a significant risk factor or predictor of longevity, interestingly. In addition to the VO2 max test, they did some balance and gait speed tests. In particular, they uh, used an obstacle course as well as a 25-foot walking test. So the individuals would walk 25 feet as fast as they could. They also did 1 rep max testing of the bicep curl, the bench press, seated row, knee extension, knee flexion, and leg press. All pretty standard movements. And finally, they did DEXA scans for measuring body weight, body fat percentage, and lean body mass. And they used MRI, interestingly, to look at thigh fat mass as well as thigh muscle mass. This, I think, is important or kind of intriguing because a lot of studies I've looked at regarding weight loss and how it affects muscle mass mostly look at fat-free mass or lean body mass ascertained from DEXA scans, which are just proxies for muscle mass because they also include things like bone mass, water, and kind of electrolytes and other things in addition to muscle mass. And when you lose weight, you see changes in total body water and things of that sort. So it's kind of unclear whether or not, or what proportion of a lean body mass change or fat free mass change is going to be muscle mass. These MRI measurements, on the other hand, look directly at the size of, or the cross sectional area of a given muscle, which I think, or as I understand it, is a superior metric or a more direct metric looking at muscle mass changes, particularly in whatever given area they look at. In this case, it was the thigh. Now that we got through all that stuff, we can get to the good stuff, the results, and I'll pull up some tables and figures as I'm reading through these. Essentially, the big takeaway is that all groups improved, or maybe not the big takeaway, but the first thing you realize is that all groups improved essentially across the board compared to control, which makes sense because the control group wasn't doing anything and all the other groups were either exercising or following a diet, a weight loss diet, or both. And also, essentially across the board, the combination group did as well or better than the other two weight loss groups. And specifically, what's interesting is that looking at the metrics you would expect the aerobic only and resistance only groups to perform well or perform better than the other groups, the combination group did just as well. So if we look at VO2 max changes, for example, the aerobic only and the combination group both did better than the resistance training group. But there's no difference, there's no statistically significant difference between the combination group and the aerobic group when it comes to VO2 max. So, from this standpoint, the combination group was able to improve their cardiorespiratory fitness the same amount as the aerobic group, despite adding in resistance training that may, in theory, have interfered with some of those endurance adaptations. Uh, Moving on, we see that when it comes to lean mass, thigh muscle cross sectional area, and strength, we see the same kind of trend in that the combination group did just as well as the resistance training group, which, if any group were to do the best, we would expect it would probably be the resistance training group, as they were solely completing exercise that was directed towards or that is ideal for building or maintaining muscle mass. Now, interestingly, if we look at the absolute outcomes for lean mass and thigh muscle cross sectional area, or sorry, it's I think it's volume actually, centimeters cubed. But anyway, we'll see that though there's no statistically significant difference, there is, at least in a relative perspective, significant difference in the absolute outcomes for the resistance training only and the combination groups. In that, for lean mass, for example, the resistance training only group lost 1 kilogram, while the combination group lost 1.7 kilograms, which is a pretty significant difference, although not statistically significant. The reason I'm bringing this up is that it could be that with a larger sample, right, there were only about 140 subjects who completed the study. With a larger sample, we may see statistically significant differences. And the same is true of the changes in thigh muscle, in that there's almost twice the loss of uh, thigh muscle as measured by the MRI in the combination group as compared to the resistance group, although we don't see any statistically significant differences. Nonetheless, we do see statistically significant differences in that the combination group outperformed the aerobic group for both of these metrics. Moving on to strength, the same is true in that the combination group saw significant increases in one repetition maximum that were not statistically significantly different from the resistance training only group, but that were statistically significantly better than the aerobic only group. The aerobic only group essentially just maintained their strength, while both the resistance only and the combination group increased their strength. Looking at the obstacle course, we see that the combination group did the best in comparison to the aerobic group, with no statistically significant differences with the resistance training group. And I'm just looking at the table here. That the same is true when it comes to gait speed, although the p-value for the combination versus resistance training group is 0.09. So again, with a larger sample size, we might see differences. Anyways, my point in all this is that the combination group did just as well or better than the other two groups, pretty much across the board when it came to the typical measurements: the lean body mass, thigh muscle, VO2 max, one repetition maximum, and then the gait speed. And they also outperformed them in the physical performance test that is kind of a measure of frailty or quality of life or ability to carry out daily activities for these elderly individuals. The combination group did statistically significantly better, or saw greater improvements than the other groups there as well. And they also saw greater improvements in the questionnaire related to frailty. So again, the real big takeaway here is that pretty much across the board, the combination group did the best or just as well as the other groups, with one exception being bone mineral density, in that the aerobic and the combination group saw statistically significant decreases in bone mineral density compared to the resistance training only group, which saw no statistically significant differences. Quote, bone mineral density at the total hip did not change significantly in the resistance group, whereas it decreased in the aerobic group and in the combination group. Bone mineral density of the whole body and at the lumbar spine did not change significantly in any of the study groups, end quote. So to clarify, there was a statistically significant difference when it came to bone mineral density of the total hip, but there were no differences in measurements at the lumbar spine or in whole body bone mineral density. And notably, the decreases were fairly small for the Let's see, aerobic group, it was a decrease of 2.6%. For the combination group, a decrease of just 1.1%. Though, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert on bone mineral density or kind of bone health, but I think that even very small decreases are significant because over time they add up. And as individuals are getting older, gradually the accumulation of these slight decreases in bone mineral density make a big difference and can lead to issues when it comes to quality of life or risk of fractures, etc. Now, zooming in a little bit on the math of the lean mass losses, if you do the math looking at the percentage of total weight loss, you'll see that for the aerobic group, the lean mass losses were 30% of total weight loss. For the resistance group, 11.8%. For the combination group, 20%. Now, I should also note that the individuals in this study, let's see, lost similar amounts of weight, all about 9 or 8.5 kilograms, which, if I do real quick math, is like between 17 and 20 pounds, I think, for those of us on the imperial system. And based on what I've read, the percentages I just listed off are pretty typical, or pretty typical when it comes to weight loss diets. In terms of the percentage of weight lost as fat-free mass or lean body mass for the aerobic group, right? That 30% number is a little bit on the higher side, but it's not uh, anything out of the ordinary, I'd say. Um, the resistance training group's loss of 11.8% of their total weight as lean body mass, to me, based on what I've seen, is pretty much like the gold standard. It doesn't get much better than that, other than not losing anything at all. But compared to typical weight loss diets that lead to significant amount of weight loss, as we see in this study, 11.8% of weight loss as lean body mass is extremely good. And even in the combination group, the 20% of weight loss as lean body mass is also better than average based on what I've seen, reading through a handful of these studies as well as kind of reviews and meta analyses. Now, moving on to some kind of takeaways. First, some interesting quotes I found in the discussion slash conclusion of the paper. Quote, although combined, aerobic and resistance training improved physical function the most among the interventions, the reductions in lean mass and bone mineral density that were attenuated but not prevented might represent an adverse effect in that these reductions further diminish tissue reserves superimposed on age-related losses. However, resistance training improved strength despite muscle loss induced by weight loss. Conversely, whether improved physical function lowers the risk of falls and fractures despite the decline in bone mineral density is currently unclear. In future studies, additional strategies to preserve lean mass might include improving the efficiency of vitamin D and protein intake, increasing weight-bearing exercises, and perhaps administering anabolic hormone therapy. Another adverse event was exercise-related musculoskeletal injuries, which could be minimized through individualized exercises, end quote. So another interesting point that I didn't address is that the subjects were receiving vitamin D and calcium supplements throughout this study as well. That last quote I think is interesting in that, again, even with some of the preservation of lean mass and increases in strength that we saw in this study, particularly in the resistance training and the combination groups, there is still a question of whether or not the net effect on risk of falling and risk of fractures and the consequent decreases in lifespan or health span potentially are worth losing all of this weight. And the authors lay out kind of some interesting proposals for how they could make improvements in follow-on studies in this regard. Wrapping up with the author's conclusion, quote, in conclusion, our study showed that weight loss plus resistance training or aerobic training improved physical function and ameliorated frailty. However, weight loss plus combined aerobic and resistance training provided greater improvement in physical function and reduction of frailty than either intervention alone, and was associated with relative preservation of lean mass, end quote. Moving on to my takeaways, I have two pretty much overarching or big takeaways. The first is that based on everything I've read regarding weight loss, with versus without exercise, doing any type of exercise in addition to weight loss in addition to a weight loss diet is likely beneficial. Even though we saw with the aerobic group, for example, greater losses in lean body mass, the fact that they were able to preserve their strength during all of this weight loss, I think goes to show, or is potentially a bonus in that looking at research I've read otherwise, just using a weight loss diet alone can lead to decreases in strength that come with the decreases in all of this muscle mass. And again, based on research that I've read, it's strength that has a greater impact on lifespan and health span, likely in later years of life, than muscle mass. Although muscle mass itself, I think, plays independent roles. So I guess my whole point is that even though this study doesn't look as good, or the results of this study don't look as good for the aerobic training protocol, I will say that if you're not get or doing and following the aerobic protocol is better than not doing anything at all. In addition, I think this is another example of exercise in general, particularly resistance training or resistance plus aerobic training, making a huge impact when it comes to weight loss, and especially in these older individuals, because there's just a major difference between where they were at the start, having potentially poor cardiorespiratory fitness and poor strength and muscle mass metrics, um, and also being obese with a BMI, I believe, averaging 36 in this population, to after the study where they lost significant amounts of weight, right, 17 to 20 pounds, and increased their aerobic fitness in some of the groups, and increased their strength in some of the groups while mitigating muscle mass losses. So not only are they losing a bunch of weight, but now they have increased or the same strength allocated towards moving that weight around when it comes to daily activities, right? Getting out of bed, getting out of a chair, carrying groceries, walking, etc. And to me, that's a pretty big plus when it comes to health span for these older individuals. Now, my second takeaway, as I kind of went in depth talking about looking at the results, is that at least in this population and according to this study, it seems like combining aerobic and resistance training together will give you the greatest or the best outcome regarding the things I just mentioned: improving cardiorespiratory fitness, maintaining muscle mass, and increasing strength during weight loss for these individuals, and potentially just without weight loss, although that kind of goes beyond the confines of this study. Um, and it's interesting that in this population, at least these elderly obese individuals, there was not really any interference effect when it came to the VO2 max measurements, as the combination group did just as well as the aerobic group, nor the strength increases that were similar between the resistance training only group and the combination group. Now, with that said, like I alluded to in the first takeaway, doing any amount of exercise is probably going to make a significant difference, in my opinion. And potentially even just losing all of that weight alone, even if you didn't get the exercise, would also make a huge difference, I think. But if you're going through all the work to lose all that weight via diet, I think it's definitely worth it to get the best bang out of your buck by just adding in even as in this case, 3 sessions per week. I think you could get a substantial amount from even less than that when it comes to endurance training and strength training. Now, that wraps it up for everything I have to say for this study. If you have any thoughts or think I messed anything up, or you disagree with anything I said or agree with anything I said, have some takeaways of your own, you can go ahead and leave them down in the comments. And the links for the papers I addressed, I'll leave below for you to go check out and do your kind of own due diligence on, if you will. Anyways, like I said, that wraps it up for this episode. If you want more of this, you can subscribe on YouTube or on Shortcut U. I have a blog there where, in addition to this video content, I post a bunch of written content as well, breaking down a bunch of different aspects of health and fitness research, as well as some content about applying that research or just in general applying health and fitness concepts in your everyday or every week life. Anyways, I'll stop rambling. I'll catch you next time.